Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 30th episode of A QISSAA with Ishika, funded by the California Arts Council Individual Artist Fellow Grant. My name is Ishika Muchal, and I'm coming to you from the unceded and ancestral lands of the Gabrielino Tongva people, also known as Los Angeles, California. I am beyond thrilled to introduce to you my guest today, Reena Dutt. She's a director dedicated to new and reimagined texts that catapult polarizing conversations through unexpected stories with the bodies, voices, and life experiences of the underheard. She just closed an experiment with an air pump that she directed at my alma mater, CalArts. It was wonderful. Got the chance to go see that. And her Broadway debut was on the collaboration at Manhattan Theater Club as assistant director to Kwame Kwei-Armah. And she recently assisted Leigh Silverman on Marry Me at New York Theater Workshop. She has worked with theater companies like Columbia University, Playwrights Realm, A.R.T, UC Riverside, Artists at Play, Coeurage Ensemble, Greenway Court Theatre, East West Players, Sacred Fools, The Public, the Fountain Theatre, and Geffen Playhouse. Reena's many fellowships include Drama League New York Directing Fellow, LCT Directors Lab, and Directors Lab West. She is also a film director and producer, having screened films at over 80 festivals, including Sundance, LAFF, Outfest, Frameline, Cucalorous, NBCUniversal, BET, PBS Latino, and HBO. She will be directing the world premiere of Pang Spa at Chalk Rep in May. I am beyond honored to welcome Reena Dutt. Thank you so much for joining me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me today.
Of course. I mean, it feels like a fangirl moment after seeing you and getting to chat with you before your show and getting to see your work in action. I'm so happy you could be here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So let's start early on in your journey. What was your first exposure to the arts? How did you get introduced to it?
Oh gosh. Being part of a South Asian family, I guess the arts have been part of my life since as far as I can remember.
Mm-hmm.
From being forced to dance folk Bengali dancing at Bengali Association activities to actually creating my own performances in the living rooms for aunties and uncles.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So exposure was pretty early. My grandfather was an artist, and so he was an oil painter, and that was very much a part of my Maharashtrian side of my family. And there are pretty much no artists on my Bengali side of the family. But yeah, I was exposed from an early age with my grandfather, and then my parents introduced me to figure skating, and so I was a figure skater for a while. And then in high school, Mr. Olson was my drama teacher, who really just like brought me in, and I was hooked, and I couldn't do anything but theater and performance after working with him.
Yeah. Doesn't that like a huge testament to the power of a good teacher to just bring you in and, like you said, hook you on to a subject?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
He was so loving, and he just, wanted to. I grew up my teen years in Arizona, and so there was a large Chicano population and a small population. But he just embraced us, and so sense of belonging that you don't get all the time. The drama department did, so that's where home became.
Yeah, absolutely. And what drew you towards directing specifically within theater?
It's an interesting question. I wasn't always wanting to be a director. I didn't know that I would go this path. I started as an actor. I was an actor in LA, New York for many years. And then I realized that I just didn't have it in me to play stereotypical characters with stereotypical storylines. I wasn't the kind of actor who was excited to get a co-star no matter what the line was.
Yeah.
And so I had to start writing my own material. And I wrote and produced a short, and my first mentor for film producing was Arun Veer, who's a British Indian writer and director. And she kind of just, took me under her wing and taught me everything that I needed to know about producing. So after I starred in that and produced it with her, I started producing movies for my friends who were all in the same boat. They were working a lot.
Yeah.
They were cool about playing roles that I wouldn't have been interested in playing
Sure.
I always had this like activist thing in me where
Mhm.
how are we representing our community? And I don't want to represent it if it's enabling bad behavior in the greater form.
Absolutely.
So I started producing for them, and they had beautiful stories they wanted to share that was outside of the professional industry. We were just kind of doing projects for ourselves, and
Sure.
that into a line producing career. So then I was a line producer and a creative producer for many years after that.
Mhm.
And it led me to a place where I could see my own vision happening for projects I was reading. And when I realized my vision creatively was a conflict of interest with the director's vision, I
Mm.
need to be directing.
Got you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I kind of fell into directing in a weird roundabout way after being an actor and producer.
Yeah, yeah. That's such a beautiful journey of like realizing that you're not getting the agency to present yourself and your stories as you want to, and then kind of making your way into a position and place where you have that agency and you're able to give other people that agency too. That's really beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. Getting to elevate voices outside my own and people
Mhm.
who practice what we do with kindness and have the same ethical values about why we make art and how we make art.
Yeah.
That's really important to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And what were some of the early struggles of your directing career? I know you touched on some of them for your acting career, but yeah.
I still feel so early career, so it's hard to say. um, I guess we're as South Asian women,
Mm.
uh, we're one of the smallest demographics of working directors out there.
Mhm.
I think there's 5 of us that I know of, and I've sent out emails to my colleagues and my peers, and I've been like, "Hey, do you know any other South Asian directors that are
Yeah.
women identifying in this like world of ours?" And it's the same names pop up over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Um, so knowing that it's there's like a they always say that if the men in your community are starting to make headway, you will follow.
Mm.
Um, with that, there are still gender biases about what women can direct. And then if
Sure.
you are a BIPOC woman, there's often an assumption that you're only interested in stories about your own demographic.
Mm. Yeah.
Um, but that's hard. But then once you get in the door with something and you start talking to people about your passions and your loves and what stories you want to tell, people are more open to bringing you in for more stuff.
Mm.
But it takes time and it takes that conversation. So you have to have the patience to find that moment and find that entry point to have that conversation.
Yeah, and I mean, statistically, just looking at like UCLA and USC Annenberg, they do like these diversity studies every year, and I had read a couple of them a few years back, and the discrepancy in funding for films written and directed by women and women of color is just it's so blatantly obvious how different the support is and how different it's like how seriously it's taken when it's released too. I
Mm.
mean, well, we see that from theater to film and TV, you know, and yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. You know.
Yeah. It's a very real issue. Very real issue.
Yeah, definitely. So, on a lighter note, what does a typical day for you look like when you're working on a project and when you're not?
A typical day when I am working on a project. Let's see.
If a typical day exists.
There is no typical day. It's all over the place, but
Mhm.
I feel like it's an amalgamation of trying to fit in designer meetings, and it's a lot of meetings. I've been on Zoom calls this week alone. I don't know how many Zoom calls I took because I'm working on my current production. And so we have production
Mhm.
meetings and the whole team is together, which is fantastic.
Right.
But I'm also working on my next film that's coming up. And so constant interviews until we get all the moving parts set in.
Right.
So it's a lot of interviews and a lot of conversations with people, and a lot of them are creative. And so your creative capacity starts, you have to keep it going and juicing it up somehow.
Yeah.
And then switching back and forth because we're in an industry where these short films and theater don't typically pay enough to just have one job at a time.
Right.
Yeah. So multitasking is vital. Having multiple projects on your slate is really
Mhm.
important. I think people who have one steady job, like teaching theater or being an academic in the theater world and getting to direct at the same time are very lucky in a weird way, because there is a constant income, but the energy retention is very real, and having work-life balance is also a very real issue in the arts. And so there's all that balance, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like as an artist, especially in like LA and New York, we're 24/7. Even if we're off the 9 to 5 or off like the 6 to 11 rehearsal period, we're still working all the time.
Yeah. And the other part of it is like, we love what we do.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
we know, like, when does work stop and play begin? Because it's
Right.
one and the same. But yeah, on days that I'm not working in theater or film, when I don't have a project on my plate or meetings set up, I'm in my audio booth, which is behind me. I do a lot of audiobook work, and I also direct a lot of audiobooks. And so that's been taking up time, and I love it. It's all storytelling at the end of the day. So that's pretty much my focus, is storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, voiceover is such an underrated field. I think in acting, it's so incredibly difficult. And audiobooks, I mean, I'm listening to a lot right now. So kudos to the work you do for that. Yeah. It's very cool.
Thanks.
Yeah. So how does your process differ from medium to medium, from audio to TV, film, theater? How does that differ?
Yeah. I feel like it's the same structures. It's the same process. For audiobooks, I would say everything in my work comes from script.
Okay.
So the text is always the most important thing. And the reason I love audiobook work is you're basically doing table work for 8 hours. And so you're learning more about the story, about the characters, about nuance and subtext. A lot of times something on page 50 relates to something on page 250. And knowing what the foreshadowing is, knowing how to carve the text and intention, emotional journey, that's all part of audiobook work. And so a lot of that is, you prep by at least reading the book once or skimming through it so that you know what dialects people are speaking, all the details. You don't want to find out that that a character is of a diverse demographic with an accent long after you've played the character many times in the that is pick up hell. But yeah, so audiobook, all the prep is that kind of work, but that doubles over with theater and film, because if I'm working on a script right now by Anu Putt, who's an up and coming actor and writer, and she's just a lovely human being, and I'm directing this film that she wrote. But I wanted to make sure that I understand all the text that she has on the page for her film. And so it's all that prep work of knocking that out of the park, because you want to make sure that her characters and their histories are represented in the visuals, which then apply to your production designers' conversations.
Right.
We've been tweaking the script for about 3 months since I've been board. But we're finally going to be shooting in May. And so we're at that stage where now we're talking to production designers, and we're talking to ADs, how they resonate, and making sure everyone's on the same page about what sensitive issues might be, like intimacy, vulnerability, safety, emotional, which is all part of all the other audiobooks. I'm working on a Japanese incarceration anthology right now. So emotional safety for all my actors who are Japanese diaspora is really important to me. So making sure that they feel comfortable. But all this stuff goes hand in hand in storytelling. So I approach theater the same way. I start with my prep work, where I'm breaking down the whole script and making sure I understand what moving parts there are in terms of character journey, scenic, all the details, and what emotional moments I want to highlight through design. Because I have a skeleton of that, but the designers are there to actually make that amazing and find more to uplift. And so all that prep work happens. And then it's just, stepping in with the actors. I mean, you get a slate of actors and a slate of designers, and your idea, which is this big, suddenly becomes this massive, amazing exploration, and all these new questions and ideas come to the table, and it just broadens everything that your heart was dreaming all this time.
Yeah.
And it expands the story, and it expands the nuance. It's just, I love bringing new brains into the space. Collaboration with other people gets me super excited. And so when I get to be in a think tank of artists of all different backgrounds, I am just, it's like this weird natural high that keeps going.
Yeah.
And I sleep and dream about it. And it's just exciting to keep having those conversations with them when I come back in the room with
Yeah.
them.
Absolutely. I think there is nothing more magical than being in a room, like a creative space with other people who also absolutely love the craft that you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you look for in collaborators when you have the opportunity to pick them?
When I have the chance to pick my collaborators, number one is kindness.
Mm,
Um, Number one is kindness. And, you know, how do they communicate? If there is a conflict of ideas,
mm,
how do they work through that with you? And
mm,
I don't believe in ego in the room. I don't want ego in the space. I do feel like my job is to come in with a vision, but my vision can only get better with the right collaborators.
mm.
So when I look for people, there's so much talent. There's like an immense amount of talent. And
Yeah.
sometimes someone who has won a Tony is not right for me, right? And sometimes somebody who is new in the industry but full of ideas is perfect for the project.
Right.
You just don't know where people land. And everyone will land in a project on your docket at some point,
Mhm.
like a Tetris game to figure out where their mind and heart fits into to which project.
Yeah.
So it's almost like matchmaking. But it's you know, I don't want a cinematographer who has worked in massive budgets for the last 10 years to have to come in and
Mhm.
try to figure out how to do this with a skeleton crew. Uh,
Right.
and if they're not open to it, that's another conversation, because you can feel when people are open to different budget tiers and things like that, because it's not an easy
Absolutely.
job to begin with. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I kind of look for talent is always there. I feel like talent is always there. And if someone's not understanding a concept for one project, chances are they're perfect for another project because they get it innately. Um,
Mhm.
so everyone fits in somewhere. It's just a matter of when, and when in our lives too, because we all need to be in alignment with how we approach the work. And
Yeah.
that changes. It changes as we grow
Mhm.
as artists. So there is no there is no list of things that I could check off. But if someone hasn't read a script before a meeting, I get nervous.
Yeah.
I want them to be excited about the story. Um,
Definitely.
yeah, so it's a number of things, but
Mhm.
collaborative style is big. Kindness is very big.
Yeah.
Um, I want the room to be safe and a feeling of community, because when I was a kid in the drama department, that was the one place I felt like it was home and safe. And
Yeah.
so I want my rooms to feel that way. And I'm not always successful, and I try to be, but I'm not always successful.
Yeah. Well, it seems like many times you are, because 'cause I'm getting, like, a really, big sense of just, like, warmth from the spaces that you're describing, and,
Mm.
someone that just commented said that you are an open and inspiring director, maker, and visionary, so I'm sure it has worked.
Oh.
Yeah. And on the topic of vision, what inspires you to tell the stories that you tell? Like, what makes you read something and be like, "I wanna work on that," or "I this is a story that I feel like I wanna tell."
Oh, so many things. And it's really particular to each story. Like, this is not a true story. When that script came along, Preston is just such a brilliant writer and
Mm,
such a kind and generous person. And
mhm,
it was just, I read his script, and there is a character in it, Kumiko Takako, and so much of her story was she's a non-fictional person. She's
mm,
a person that had commit suicide in the States after looking
mhm.
for an old lover that she worked with in Japan.
Wow.
And
Mhm,
Kumiko the Treasure Hunter is a movie that was loosely based on her life,
mhm,
but they represented her in a way that just, it was really heartbreaking, because I knew of the movie. I knew
mhm,
it was fictionalized in the movie, and I knew that more stereotype was brought into the movie.
mhm,
And I kept thinking about identity, and I was like reading this book and or the
mm,
play, and I kept thinking about identity and perception and what people think of us.
Yeah.
You know, that entire play is based on Madame Butterfly and Kim from Miss Saigon.
Right.
So, you know, what are their representations? What feels real? What felt caricature-like? All those concepts just really struck my heart, because growing up, it's really strange, because growing up, I didn't feel like I didn't belong. I always felt like my peers, and I didn't deal with friends who were like, why do you smell like karipata? Like, they weren't, you know,
Yeah.
I didn't have that experience growing up.
Yeah.
I grew up in a very Catholic and Mormon community that was so open and loving to us, and took care of my parents and took care of me so closely. There weren't a lot of South Asians where I grew up.
Yeah.
So when I came to LA to be an actor, I remember walking into an audition, and I was at a producer call or something, and this casting director was like, "Oh, you speak English so well. Where did you learn?" I was like, I was raised in Jersey. Like, what?
Yeah.
Jersey and Arizona. I was born in Jersey.
Yeah.
And she was so innocent about it. She was so surprised. And I was like, what is happening here? So the idea of being stereotyped, or dealing with misrepresentations, or people making assumptions about you, like, oh, your parents must be strict. Or were your parents arranged? And I'm like, I have a very non-traditional upbringing. My parents met in grad school. They were best friends for grad school, and then they married each other. And they didn't have gender roles in the household. I wasn't raised to think girls were different. It's just not the life I was raised in. And so stereotypes really, really get me. And I felt like for Kumiko Takako, it still like gets me a little choked up, because I'm just like, she ended up in a movie. And in film, everything's non-changeable. It doesn't evolve. Film is permanent. And now people know her as this character.
Yeah.
And not who she really was. And that's going to be forever. Whereas our theatrical characters, the theater characters that were in the play, had the opportunity to change, because they could rewrite it. They could add context from the current day. They could change how this piece of theater or their theater could be perceived if it chooses to, right?
Yeah.
So, so when I read that play, that really just struck me. But it's always something different that gets my attention. And I to dream things. If I read a play and I don't dream about it within the first 3 days after reading it, I know I'm not supposed to do it.
Wow.
If I vision, like a daydream or whatever, if I don't have that, I know I'm not supposed to do it.
Yeah.
But that's exciting, because then I'm like, oh, what directors can I recommend? What directors really jive with this? So either way, but I don't want to say yes to everything. I think it's a disservice to the playwright, to the writer, to the team, really, if you're not 100% into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that ability to say no also comes with like a lot of learning what you like, and also having that agency, because I feel like a lot of times for creatives, as we start out, it's such a risky place to be able to say no, but also it's so important to say no to things that like are not representing your people properly. Like I'm in that boat right now of, and I understand that in our generation, in our time, I think because of all the work that your generation and the generations before have done, have given us so much agency to be able to say yes and no to the projects that we want to be able to do that just don't represent us well. But I think I started this show because of representation and because of how much it matters. So it really warms my heart to hear you speak about that and how influential and a core tenet it seems to be a part of your practice.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I am in the same breath, I'm going to say maybe we set y'all up for something new, but y'all are taking the reins like insanely talented humans and doing more than we ever could.
Thank you. No, not at all. It's only because of you guys. Literally only because of you guys.
Love fest.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. I think one of the things that whenever I'm looking at a role and of whether I want to do it or not, is thinking about whether it has like authentic multidimensional representation. So I want to ask you, what in your words does that look like?
That's a hard one for me to answer. I have yet to see anything that represents my family, right?
Mm,
And there are so many amazing filmmakers doing great stories that truly represent them as South Asian creators.
mm,
And it's just not my journey.
mm,
So I respect it, right? And we all come from
yeah.
different backgrounds. We all come from different experiences. Some of us dealt with racism more than others growing up. And
Right.
I was very lucky. I was very lucky. And so I look at these stories that maybe I don't resonate with, but I know that so many other people do.
Hmm.
And this was hard as a producer because I did say no to a lot of very successful projects because
Hmm.
I didn't personally resonate with the story. I didn't understand it for
Mm,
myself, right?
sure.
And I'm waiting patiently, and maybe I could be doing and writing, but I'm waiting patiently to see my family story represented.
Hmm.
Um, Hopefully that happens someday, but there's so many nuances to our lives, and
Yeah.
we are such a global population. And so,
Huge, huge diaspora. Yeah.
yeah, massive diaspora. And so it's exciting to see a new story. It's exciting to see anything. And I think it's all inclusive because everyone's journey is so different. You have to be
Right.
true to who you are.
Yeah. And I keep on going back to this. I feel like I've mentioned this in a couple of kisses before, but I was on this like back when it was called Twitter, X. They had like this live stream thing going on with an interview with Varsha Sharma from Teen Vogue and Maitri Ramakrishnan, and they were talking about Never Have I Ever. And I had asked this question about like to Maitri if she ever feels like this pressure of representing everyone who looks like her. And she was like, initially I feel like I had that pressure when it started, but then also realizing that she is one person, it is one story. Mindy wrote one character, like we cannot expect one story to cover everyone. And there needs to be more stories for us to be able to pick and choose which one we want to relate with. Like every story, every time I see a brown girl, I'm going to be like, hell yeah, a win. I might not relate to it, but it's the desire and the need for like an abundance of stories that you see yourself in to be able to pick from which one you feel most aligned with.
Yeah.
And I just hope we're able to get to a place where, like you said, you're able to see yourself and I'm able to see myself, not just because it's a brown face, but because we actually see ourselves in that character, in that story, in that life that they're living.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's similar behind the scenes too. I remember when I was an actor in New York, we would there was like a small pocket of us that were all auditioning for the same things.
Hmm.
This was a long time ago, 20 years ago. And
Yeah.
we would all meet up we'd see each other at the audition in that waiting room and say, okay, we'll meet at coffee after, let's go.
Yeah.
Then at coffee, we would tell each other where the other auditions were and when to crash them. And
Yeah.
but there was like this feeling of if your friend booked it or if you knew the person who booked it and you knew they were good at what they did and it meant that they were elevating all of you.
Absolutely.
It was such a great feeling. And it wasn't even competition between each other. For me,
Mhm.
it felt like it was competition against the greater society who didn't see us in different places.
Mhm.
And so if
Mhm.
one of us got in, that meant that it was opening doors to so many more of us.
Yeah.
Um, and I hope that continues because now I'm hearing, and I'm not auditioning anymore, but I'm hearing that sometimes you walk into a room and you don't know anybody.
Mm.
I don't know what that's like. I always know
Yeah.
someone because it's like a type that's called in, but now there seems to be a lot more expansion
Mm.
in how South and in not just how South Asians are represented, but what South
Sure.
Asians are allowed to play.
Right. Right. Yeah. And it's like we don't only have to go in for a character because they're Indian or Pakistani, you know? It's like we can go in for a character because they're a character.
A character, a
Really.
person living
Yeah,
life.
a human, a Homo sapien.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wanna kind of touch back on, like, the idea of representation, and you were talking about this is not a true story. I unfortunately did not get to see it, but one of my friends was in it, and she told me so much about that. And I want to ask you, what do we do when we're faced with either being like working in an institution or attending something that is done by an institution that is very clearly not um, representing a character or a person or their ethnicity properly? How do you respond to that? And when do you feel like it's your responsibility to make that change?
I am a huge advocate of cultural consultants on my work.
Mm,
And I tend to do a lot of global work. Excuse me. So I'm really big on advocating for that, especially if I see or feel like something is not authentic and maybe it's not my culture, but I've been reading or studying and
mm,
figure out like what is authentic to that culture. Um,
sure.
I I tend to advocate for cultural consultants or a dramaturg from the culture, or
Mhm.
I tend to advocate for that. And I'm learning, okay, number one, there's a budgetary side of it, right? Can the institution afford hiring?
Right.
Um, the other part of it is some of the theaters I've worked with in the middle of America, where it's least expected for them to care or advocate for the same,
Mm,
they have made such huge efforts to find the right people to join our room.
mm,
Um, I was on a show at a company called Constellation Stage, and
mhm,
it was Karim Fahmi's play, American Fast, which
mm.
is it's an Egyptian American story, but it's a basketball story first and foremost. It's a
Yeah,
basketball story. She's a basketball player,
I
Muslim.
think I've read a bit of this. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So over at Constellation Stage, they're in the middle of Indiana, and
Mhm.
I was kind of like, it would be so great if we can find an Egyptian female who understands sports and theater to come
Yeah.
in, be our dramaturg or a cultural consultant. And
Mhm.
they were kind of like, oh, we'll try. And I at that point, I was kind of, I thought, oh yeah, they're going to try for a couple days and then give up.
Yeah.
Um, they found somebody who was not even a basketball player. Like, she was a basketball player in high school. She was Egyptian, Muslim,
Mhm.
lived in Canada, understood what it's like to like straddle cultures,
Yeah.
had done theater when she was younger, was an academic dealing with like Egyptian Muslim history and content, and she was a culture worker in Indiana who
Amazing.
lived in the community, and she came in and gave her heart to this project.
Mhm.
Um, there are so many institutions like that. Every time we see one that doesn't want to do the work, expecting the person they
Mm,
hired who's of the culture to come and do the work for them, there are a handful of other institutions who are busting their butt to make it happen.
mhm. Yeah.
You gotta
Yeah.
have that faith. But I'm a big advocate for bringing in the right people and
Yeah.
populating also the room with people who are curious. Like, curiosity is everything. I was talking to my aunt who went to I think she was in New York for school in the 60s or the early
Mhm.
70s. And she said one big difference between New York and Toronto at the time, because she was between Toronto and New York, and
Mhm.
she had immigrated here. But she said that in New York in the 70s, people were curious. And if they didn't
Mm.
understand the culture, they'd ask questions. And that curiosity made me feel safe, because they
Yeah.
pointing fingers or like diminishing culture. They might ask if
Sure.
Indians wear shoes, but it was an honest curiosity in the 70s, because
Yeah.
these people had never gone to India or heard anything about
Yeah.
it. Social media wasn't a thing. Um, and that really struck me when she said that, because I was like, yeah, if people are curious and they really want to know the truth and authentic truth behind things, stories that they're a part of, whether they're a costume designer or costume designer, lighting designer. When I'm talking about metaphor in lighting design, a lot of times, like, okay, if we're representing an Egyptian culture, what colors represent what for Egypt?
Right.
How is that frame to show, how her thought progresses throughout the story, or, and working with people who are just as curious and really want to know. That's more important to me than having everybody on the team come from one perspective.
Yeah.
I can tell you that particular consultant even said to us as a group, she was so excited by the questions we had because she would have never asked them herself. Just by way of being so, so in touch with her culture in the way that she was raised, that having the questions really made her dig in even deeper.
Yeah.
And that's also a beautiful thing of exchange. If we keep telling stories from one perspective, how do we learn about ourselves? How do we put the mirror up?
Yeah, absolutely. I love what you were saying about like kind of speaking and working with people who speak from a place of curiosity rather than like assumption. Because I think they're very similar, but like you're saying, one can make you feel like someone is inviting you to share something about you versus one can be very othering and like, oh, I know that you're different. And I'm like, Yeah. And oh God, it just makes me think of like the Indiana story that you're saying. If they wanted to, they would, It's like a dating quote. Like if they wanted to, they would.
Yeah. He's just not that into you.
Yeah. Yeah. You spoke a little bit about this earlier, but a lot of times women of color and just artists of color in general are pushed to make stories of their people, quote unquote, their people, and like only that. So how do you think as a director, writer, creator, how do you think you have, and how do you think other people can push that boundary of what is considered a story that you are allowed to tell and want to tell?
That's a tough one. That's a tough one because so much of that is based on other people's perceptions of you or your ability or your work. So, there's some South Asian stories I probably shouldn't tell because I don't personally relate to them. But at the same time, I can say that being raised with a lot of South Asians in college, at least, I got to see a lot of different perspectives firsthand and realize how lucky I was. Just kidding. But I always say that if I met my parents in the street, I would be friends with them. So
yeah. Me too. I think me too.
Yeah, it's pretty nifty.
Yeah.
But yeah, as far as like what stories can a person tell, for me personally, and this might conflict with a lot of viewers, but hopefully not. And I'm sorry if I offend anybody. The interest in finding the authentic truth is more important to me than the culture of the person telling the story. It's amazing. I lived in India. I had to fill up the buckets of water when the water came. I know that life. And just because I'm American doesn't mean I don't have that life experience behind me. And yeah, so there's that part of it because, growing up in Sierra Park at a time where the electricity just like went all the time and we didn't have water all day. We had an hour of water in the morning, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are fellow Daisies who have never experienced that before. And the way that it's represented feels inauthentic to me personally. But if they are willing to go and see what it's like or talk to people who know what it's like and truthfully represent that, that's different. And I think that goes across cultures. It goes across gender. Really taking the time to figure it out is important to me. It was I worked on the hombres in in Portland.
Mhm.
And it's a Chicano and Mexican story.
Mhm.
A couple of our actors were Latino, but they were not from Mexico.
Mm.
And they were so conscious that cultures across Latino worlds and countries is different.
Yeah.
And so they did everything they possibly could to truly represent the Chicano characters and the immigrant characters. And the undocumented characters. They did everything they could to be authentic and true to the people they were representing.
Right. Yeah.
And I hope that we, as a Desi community, a brown community, want to do the same, because I know being Bengali and being Maharashtrian are two completely different things.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And so how do we show the nuance and show the care for the nuance and show the care for the details? If a person is willing to try to show care in as many ways as possible, then please tell the story.
Yeah. And how do we also tell people that there is a difference between different parts of India and different parts of South Asia? Like, just because I look brown does not mean that I'm going to be able to tell the story of like someone from South India. Very different experience. Yeah.
Yep. 1000%.
Yeah. And just like this willingness of being authentic is rings a bell in my head of like this one theater show that I did. I like how you said it goes beyond ethnicity into even gender and other things. I was part of this show where the director and the assistant director were both male, and it was a very women-centered story. And I think the only reason that that show worked is because of the approach that they took in the room of making it a non-hierarchical, collaborative environment of like, we know that this is not our story. We are here and like opening the thing of like, what does this mean to you? Because you in the cast are the people that have actually experienced and lived through this. How do you bring that story? And I think that willingness to engage on a level of like, I am not an expert just because I'm directing this is so valuable. Like you're saying, of approaching it from a genuine interest and authentic nature of like pursuing the truth. And I think by doing that, you are going to bring in people who are close to the truth that you're telling, because if you're interested in it, you know that that truth is not in yourself. So you have to bring in other people. Yeah.
Love that. I love that you had that experience. I think it's so important for all of us to experience that, because excuse me, there's so much othering happening in our community right now. Our community meaning the theater and arts community in general.
Right.
And I just don't believe in operating that way. I don't believe in oppressing anybody's voice. And if there's a curiosity and questioning happening, I think that's great.
Yeah.
Let the questions happen, but cutting people off based on race or gender or it just doesn't sit well with me, because it doesn't build empathy. It actually closes off empathy.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's definitely like a different experience. I can only speak from my personal history, but I've felt the most safe and like heard in spaces largely with women of color. But I also know how important it is to be in like artistic spaces with people who don't understand you, but are willing to engage with like discourse around your experience, because that's the only way that other people are going to learn. And I hate that, like, you know, oftentimes we as people of color have to do the educating, but if someone is willing to engage and it's not like a task or like a burden to you, it's really refreshing to be in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add to that, being able to be open to saying, if I F up, please tell me.
Yeah.
And I find myself saying that particularly when I'm directing at colleges. I think there's a lot of cultural changes that I'm not 100% understanding yet. And so trying to open the space and say, if I mess up with your pronoun, if I mess up with how you like to define yourself in any way, please tell me. And hopefully I just hope that everybody in a room that's working together is exposed to the opportunity to feel comfort in saying, I might mess up, please tell me. And let's work together on it.
Yeah. Yeah. I love just like the humility radiating from just like your entire person right now. Cause it's so rare to hear like someone in a directorial position, because we often associate directors with like this high level on a hierarchy, but being like able to acknowledge that you are capable of making mistakes is so powerful.
It's
And so
important.
important. Yeah, so important. Drastically shifting the question. How do you feel like your identity has impacted your art and your art has impacted your identity?
Oh, good Lord. Your question. Just kidding. I feel like a kid. I mean, I feel like this is a weird playground where every project teaches you something new about yourself and about the people around you, and it's all a playground, and you have to be open to new games and playing with new kids and figuring it out. And I think because I was lucky enough to grow up in a community that was so nurturing and caring of my parents and myself and my brother, I innately assume a blank slate with people that I haven't met yet. Because I believe that there's hope, and I believe that there's a possibility of understanding. There's also a possibility of making mistakes and hoping that they're open to the mistakes, and informing me and helping me along. But like, I didn't walk into this industry with big walls up. Walls grew very quickly once I got here. But after a lot of soul searching and going from being an actor to being a producer, you see things from totally different perspectives of the and I've been able to somehow bring my walls back down with a little bit of fear. I'm not going to lie about that. But yeah, every job just like teaches me, how can you be more patient about this? How can you walk in with more understanding that that person is from a generation that didn't have to acknowledge their mistakes because they were in a position of power all the time. That person was never questioned about their ability. So they don't know what it's like to be a brown woman walking into a room where, you know, I was just in an interview where one of the it was an interview for it was like a general meeting. It wasn't even an interview. It was a general meeting, and the artistic leader asked me who I dream of assisting. And I was kind of like, why is this person not asking me what show I dream of directing?
Yeah, I don't like that.
But this is very real. There's assumptions. I walk into rooms where there are going to be assumptions that I don't know what I'm doing. And that is also informative for me to like figure myself out, because how do you respond when people don't believe you're capable, right? It's interesting, it's scary how I learn about myself, how I learn about things around me. All the things kind of go hand in hand. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but like, yeah,
that's so real. I'm so sorry you had to be asked that question. That's kind of frustrating.
It's building my character.
Everything's for the plot. Absolutely. Yeah. But still, I mean, it's like a bummer to hear, regardless, even if it is. Yeah. If you had like supreme power over the theater industry, what would you like to see in terms of changes?
My biggest thing that I would like to see in terms of changes, the biggest thing is the acceptance of the fact that just because a person's young doesn't mean they're green. Just because a person's older doesn't mean they're less successful.
Ooh, I like that.
We come into this work from such different walks of life, and it's really a shame when people assume things of others based on age. I think them is a very real thing. And we change careers all the time. We change what position we're in this industry all the time. So just because somebody starts directing later in their life doesn't mean they don't have 15 to 18 years of experience observing all that time of what that person.
Yeah.
So like more respect for women over 40, more opportunity for women over 40, less assumptions about young people and what they're able to do, less assumptions about like needing to pay your dues. I'm like, there's no dues to pay. I think it's allowing people entry points to learn. And those entry points shouldn't just be for new graduates. It should be for everybody who is showing initiative, showing interest, who is a hard worker. And so just an equalization on ageism. I think that's a big thing that I would like to see change. Our industry is not like, it's not like other fields where people graduate, they start, and then there's a hierarchy to grow. There is no hierarchy in this industry.
Right.
Some people shoot one short and suddenly are offered a 3 million feature, and some people have done 11 shorts and go to major festivals, and for whatever reason, nobody wants to give them money. So, you know, there's no rhyme or reason for success in this industry. So as long as a person's enjoying the journey and hard, that's all that really matters.
Yeah. And I think what you said about like how people change jobs and enter the field at such different times is so important to note, because I mean, just looking at like the trajectory that you've had so far in your career that you've talked about, someone could say that like, you know, oh, you were an actor before or a producer before, like you're not, you didn't have that much time directing, but all of that experience brings nuance to your craft as a director. And like, I love doing other things in the arts. And I think we as creatives are such well-rounded people, especially those who like are willing to engage with different aspects of entertainment, of theater, of film. And that's so powerful. And ageism is something that totally does not get talked about. That's so real.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
It's fun.
Yeah. It's definitely important. What advice would you have for a young or just up and coming South Asian artist in the field of theater?
In the field of theater. Work hard, know your stuff, be open-minded, and try. If you happen to have walls up surrounding looking stupid or failing, try to bring those walls down as quickly as possible. Being a mess and being imperfect will get you further along in life and in craft if you're allowing yourself to be imperfect and up.
Yeah.
What we
I need to hear that. Yeah.
it's a thing because we're constantly taught, oh, you have to be straight A student. Well, guess what? Sometimes a straight A student doesn't know how to reach their emotional integrity because it's always guarded.
Yeah.
Take the guards down because we're here to play. We're just playing. We're getting paid to play.
Yeah.
So like play.
Absolutely. Is there like an influential episode, because the show is called A QISSAA and QISSAA means episode. Is there an episode from your life that was really influential on you as a person or as an artist?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
I for a show at Cornerstone Theater when Bill Rausch was artistic director, and I believe he was directing the show as well. And I didn't get it. I didn't get the part. And I was so upset. But he called me. He called me personally to tell me that he really loved my audition and he wanted me to keep in touch with him in case something else came up. He wanted to track me. All this to say, 20, 25 years later, he still takes my calls. He still advises. He's seen me through all my work changes, my career changes. One of the biggest advocates, one of the kindest and most generous people I've ever met. Between Bill and Diane Rodriguez, who passed away a few years ago, they were always my mentors and role models when I knew nothing about what I was doing or how I was supposed to be doing it.
Yeah.
They would always respond to emails and advise, or just like be there to be a sounding board off of things. And I was dumb. I didn't know what I was doing. And I was just like, they're really cool. Maybe I should ask them. And I'm like, they're the biggest theater people in the industry. Like, what are you doing? I look back at that. I'm like, why were you such a dumb?
No.
But they Diane and Bill both like live life in a way that fosters and nurtures new people in the industry to grow and be good and figure out what directions to take. And I hope that I get to pass that on somehow.
Yeah. So important to have like a mentor that is like, that is in your corner. It's so empowering. Yeah.
And all you need is one.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Can you talk about any of your upcoming projects and where people can find your work?
Yeah. You can go to www.reenadutt.com. That's my website, and I have all the things that I do that I'm proud of up there. And I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook. I'm not a social media guru, so it's super fun.
Is anyone really?
Yes, some people
all figuring it.
Yeah.
I know.
And I love them. I have a mantle in my corner with incense sticks. So there you go. With their faces.
Amazing.
Yeah, you can find me online. You can find me all over social, just posting stuff.
Yeah. And PangSpa.
PangSpa's coming up next. Chalkrep.org. PangSpa is opening in mid-May. And then we're shooting Crossing the Desert by Anupat. And that is happening at the end of May.
Very cool.
And then if you're on the East Coast in the Berkshires, my next show after that is going to be over in Lenox, Massachusetts. So
nice.
Go check that out too.
Someone book me a flight, I will go.
Cool.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much for just sharing your heart and your art with us and with me and everyone watching. I mean, I'm just reading all the comments that people are putting in the chat, and they just love the way that you're talking about your journey and your craft, and I really appreciate your generosity with that. So thank you.
Thank you everybody for watching and supporting Ishika. It's just amazing interviews that you have up here.
Yes. 30 episodes. Yay, 3 years.
So honored to be one of them. So thank you.
Thank you. All right. Have a lovely rest of your day. And for everyone watching, stay tuned for the announcement for the next episode. All right. Take care.
Bye.